Well, it is 7:08. I would like to officially welcome you to a Twist of Grief Forum, Part 2, hosted by Gamma Kappa Omega Chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. My name is Markea Haywood. I am the Chapter President of Gamma Kappa Omega Chapter. We welcome you to a Twist of Grief, Part 2. As mentioned, my name is Markea Haywood. I am the president of Gamma Kappa Omega Chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. GKO is a part of the Unapologetically Ready Central Region under the leadership and direction of Central Regional Director Kiana W. Davis. Tonight's discussion is meant to empower our families with resources, support, and understanding regarding areas of grief. Regardless of what stage you might fall in, know that you are not alone. Empowering the Black family has been a part of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sororities Incorporated DNA since the founding on Howard University campus in Washington, D.C. on January 15, 1908. As you might know, our international director, Danette Anthony Reed, has launched 6 initiatives under her 2022 through 2026 administration. These initiatives include strengthen our sisterhood, build our economic wealth, enhance our environment, uplift our local community, advocate for social justice, and empower our families. Under these initiatives, the goal is to improve the lives of those we serve. Grief and transition is never easy, and we all experience it differently. Know that this is a safe space, and we will continue to utilize our collective efforts to fight the stigma, raise awareness related to grief, depression, anxiety, trauma, and more. We welcome you once again to a Twist of Grief, Part 2, the Pink Table Talk. At this time, I will turn the program over to our moderators, Rasheda Pippens and Caprice Riley.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming to a Twist of Grief. Like it was mentioned, get comfortable, grab your tissues, get some water, whatever you need, as we kind of dive into our grief journeys. I'm going to take the time to introduce Caprice. Caprice is originally from the north suburbs, of Chicago. She's the youngest of 6 and a first-generation college student. After having her daughter as a teen, she became driven to complete her college degree, and she holds a Bachelor of Science in Healthcare Management and a Master's in Social Work from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Caprice currently resides in Tennessee, where she works as a hemostasis medical social worker for both pediatrics and adults at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. She is passionate about engaging others through communication, mentorship, and advocacy with influence to inspire and instill hope. She's involved in the African American Employee Resource Group at Vanderbilt, assisting in the Community and Social Outreach Committee. She recently joined the Tennessee Hemophilia Bleeding Disorder Foundation Scholarship Committee, in which she plays an impactful role in the distribution of scholarships to patients that have bleeding disorders. She is also very active in Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated in the Gamma Kappa Omega chapter. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her daughter, volunteering at her church, traveling, blogging, and time with her dog. I'd like to introduce to you my sorority sister, Caprice Riley.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Rasheda. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I'm Caprice, and I'm going to be providing some information in reference to grief. Today, we also have a panelist who are going to share their grief stories with you all. And then we'll provide you all with a couple different resources. We also encourage you towards the end of the presentation to share your grief story as well. So get comfortable, find some tissue if you need it. Know that this is a safe space, like it's already been said. So if you fall apart, it's okay. We're going to help support you and kind of build you back up as well. So defining grief. So grief is a natural response to loss. It can be both universal and personal. So universal is something like COVID. Personal is something like a loss of a family member or a friend or something. So an individual experiences grief in a variety of different ways, depending on how they are influenced by the nature of the loss. It can be triggered by any event that has an identity-altering loss. So this can include a natural disaster, a divorce, one's own illness, the illness of someone that they love, and certainly the death of a loved one. So symptoms, this includes strong feelings of sadness, loss, the inability to focus or concentrate, lack of trust, feelings of loss of purpose or intention in life. So sometimes we kind of lose what we're going to do next after we've had a loss, and then the denial of a loss. All right, so these are the stages of grief. We've all kind of heard of the different 5 stages of grief. So briefly, we're going to go over those. So denial is usually the first stage of grief. This can look like avoidance, shock, becoming easily distracted, trying to keep yourself busy, and then kind of shutting down. With denial, we kind of think of, like, I can't believe this just happened. Why did this happen? We kind of, wonder, is this a dream? Like, are we waking up to this every day? The next one is anger. Anger sometimes looks like irritability, resentment, feeling embarrassed about the death. Sometimes people are very frustrated. This also can increase substance use. So you may find yourself drinking more, or going out more, or using other substances during this stage. Bargaining, that is a stage where we kind of find ourselves overthinking or predicting the future. We may worry, feel guilty. We may feel shame or anxiety. We have a lot of wishful thinking in this stage, to where we are kind of thinking, what if I did more? What if I reached out more? What if I took my loved one to rehab? Or, what if I found more clinical studies for my grandma who, had cancer? That is kind of what bargaining looks like. Depression, it can look different for everyone. So it can be feelings of sadness, of course. Your mood may change, your appetite may increase or decrease. You may have like low energy or low motivation, not wanting to get up and do anything. Sometimes in the depression stage, we kind of, if we're used to having like a really tidy, clean house, we may find ourselves, barely washing and doing our laundry, barely doing the dishes. So depression can look different for a lot of people. And sometimes it can look like hopelessness. So the last stage is acceptance. Acceptance kind of looks more like mindful behaviors. You're becoming more present with the loss. You're trying to find ways to kind of cope with it. It can be just kind of engaging in the reality of what is, happening right now. It also kind of looks like adapting. And so with acceptance, you find yourself in a place of, okay, this happened. I know this happened. And now I'm trying to find, different ways to help myself through this. With the stages of grief, one thing to keep in mind is they are not linear. So you may go from denial to depression to anger, back to denial. And so it kind of may fluctuate depending on, how you're feeling, your mood, kind of what happened, what kind of loss you've actually had. So if nothing else, just try to keep in mind that the stages of grief aren't linear, and sometimes you can go back and forth. You can go ahead and advance. All right, so these are the 12 forms of grief. So at our last forum, I kind of went into detail about all 12 forms of grief. To save space and time today, I'm actually going to go through 4 forms of grief so that you kind of have an understanding of what this looks like. And then our panelists are going to explain their stories. So we're going to talk a little bit about anticipatory grief. So this grief is the anticipation of a loss that's going to happen. And so this could be terminal illness. This could be a layoff from, a job. So maybe they told everyone that, they're anticipating layoffs coming up soon. This can be an impending divorce, right? So we kind of know that we're going through the loss of this relationship. And then 2, like caregivers often have anticipatory grief, taking care of someone, knowing that, loss is projected to happen. Another one that we're going to go through today is complicated grief. So complicated grief looks like conflicting emotions. So sometimes it's grief over, it could be an estranged parent. It can be grief over an abusive partner. It can be the loss of a job that, no longer serves you, no longer, you don't find purpose in it anymore. Complicated grief also has layers. So it can be, someone lied to you about what the grief was, and then you later find out, they passed from something else. So that's complicated. Another one that we're going to go over today is cumulative grief. So this is grief that builds up over time. So maybe you've met someone or heard someone discuss the fact that, their grandma died. And then 6 months later, their cousin died. And then a week later, their father died. This is cumulative grief. This means that this grief happens consecutively. And before you get to the next grief, you find yourself, I didn't even get to process the grief that just happened. And now somebody else passed away. This is also kind of felt through, COVID and the fatigue that we all kind of felt with COVID. So this can also be accumulated grief. And then we're going to go through traumatic grief. So traumatic grief is normal grief. It's in response to a combination of a traumatic event, right? So something unexpected, something violent, something horrific or terrifying. And then this grief, the distress of the grief can impair your daily functioning. So those are the 4 griefs that we are going to go over today. I encourage you all to kind of look through the 12. You can Google them, look through the 12 forms of grief, but we are just going to focus on these 4 today. All right, you can advance. All right, so I'm going to share my grief story. So I experienced traumatic grief. My brother, basically, I'm the youngest of 6, kind of like was stated. So he was the brother that was right above me. He passed away October 14th, 2019, and he just went to sleep and didn't wake up. So that was traumatic. I was actually on my way to work when I got a phone call that stated that he was no longer receptive or no longer responsive. And I kind of pulled over at this hospital. I was actually living in Carbondale at the time, and I was going to see a client who lived in Mount Vernon. And so at the time, I was working as an adoption therapist. I was being supervised by a licensed clinical social worker. And so I worked with a son of therapists at the time. And so I called my supervisor and I told my supervisor, hey, this is what's going on. I can't, go to work today. And so, she, pretty much handled that for me. And then I started to drive home. I drove home and I received a call from the hospital saying they pronounced my brother dead at the hospital. And so, they had stated that they were going to call my parents and tell my parents what happened. So they told me not to call my parents if I could, just because if you're driving and you kind of experience something traumatic, you can, get into an accident, anything can happen to you. So they just kind of disencouraged me calling. So I didn't call. I drove home and I called my brother. And I told him my brother, and he was at the gym at the time. And I told him, you know, kind of what was going on and what had happened. And I remember him saying to me kind of like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, I don't know what to do either. And he just was like, well, how are we going to know, you know, that mom and dad know, right? That they've got to the hospital and they've been told. And I was like, because they're going to call you and tell you your brother died. And he was just kind of like, okay. And I think I'm just like a very black and white person. I was just very matter of fact, like, this is what's going on, this is the situation. And, you know, it's kind of like you're in shock. And so, you know, I got off the phone with my brother. And at the time, I remember, you know, just saying a prayer, and I was just kind of like on my way home before I actually got the call that they pronounced him, you know, dead. I just kind of said, God, you know, if this is you, fine, okay? You know, it's gonna be fine. If this is not you, you better bring my brother back, because we ain't got time for this. So that it was just kind of like my prayer. And so after finding out and telling my brother, I ended up having to do a lot today. And so like that day I had to take my daughter to kind of get an x-ray. And so I ended up kind of doing that just because she kind of hurt her knee in gymnastics. And so I went ahead and took her to go get that done. And then I got the phone call from my mom. And so she had found out. So I kind of like stepped out the car and I kind of listened to my mom. I didn't want to tell my daughter because she still had practice that night. And I felt like she had so much going on. I just didn't want to tell it right then and there and kind of like mess up her day. So I waited. I waited until the end of the night and I told my daughter. And I just kind of remember her like screaming and she was just like, no. And like, they're very close. So it kind of like tore me up because my daughter was 11. She's 15. So she was 11 at the time. And so I just kind of remember it just being like, we just sat, like we did nothing. We just sat. I remember talking to my supervisor and she's saying like, you know, you could take as much time as you need. And so I'm like, okay. And I called her school. And so, you know, she was out a couple of days. And I remember the very next morning, I did nothing. Like I did nothing. I sat in my daughter's room for the entire day. I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know, I wasn't hungry. I didn't want to drink anything. Like, and you know, my daughter, she got up and she ate breakfast and it was just a quiet day. That is how we kind of spent the next 2 days. She went back to school Thursday. I went back to work on Thursday because I just couldn't sit. I had sat from Monday evening, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I was like, I can't sit here any longer. I remember one of my friends calling me and she was just kind of like, hey, if you do nothing else, you better eat, because she had lost her brother the year before and was just kind of like, she got really sick. She ended up in the ICU and now she's diabetic. And so she said, if you don't do anything, this will not be your story. So you need to eat. And so I was like, okay. So I was like forcing myself to eat and I went to work that Thursday. And I remember being fortunate enough to work in an environment where I worked with tons of therapists, right? So like, I had therapy at work for a long time. I didn't actually go see a therapist or, you know, go talk to anyone because I had therapists. My supervisor came in and she would kind of talk to me about things. She would kind of help me process out loud. Sometimes they would just let me sit in my office and fall apart. I needed that. Like I didn't know I needed to be surrounded by, you know, people who were therapists and kind of knew what to do until that moment. And so that was therapeutic for me. One of the things that I shared with her was I made memories at the hospital where I got the phone call. So I ended up had pulled over when I got the phone call, and it just so happened to be a hospital in Mount Vernon. And I knew every Monday I had to go see this client. And so I was like, this is not going to be bad for me every Monday. And so every Monday I made a conscious decision to get up early and to go sit at that hospital. And I would like listen to his videos. I would look at pictures. I would kind of like review text messages. I just kind of went through because I knew I had to pass this every Monday. And if I wasn't going to pass this every Monday, I lived in Carbondale. I'm from Chicago. So I'm like, I got to pass Mount Vernon anyway to go home. And this is not going to be traumatic for me every time I go. I'm not going to be falling apart, driving home. Like, that's just not going to be what I'm going to do. And so I ended up telling like the therapist that I worked for at the time, and she said, not a lot of people can make a conscious decision to process out loud right now. She said, the fact that you even thought to do something like that, just know that, it gives language to, the amount of grief that you're going to process, during your story and your journey, and it's so necessary. And so for me, unknowingly, I'm thinking, this is just not going to be bad. She was like, this is therapeutic, and this is how you're going to process it. And so kind of fast forwarding just a little bit, my brother passed away on a Monday. I went back to work on Thursday. I had a call from like an old supervisor on Friday, and she was like, hey, there's a job at Vanderbilt, you should apply. And I'm like, okay. So I ended up applying for this job on Saturday. HR called me on Sunday. I had my first interview on the following Monday. So it was a week from the day my brother had passed. I had 4 interviews after that. So my first 30 days were not only traumatic, but it was also me trying to like navigate life still. I ended up obviously getting hired at Vanderbilt, and my first year was quiet. I remember my first year being quiet. I remember a lot of people kind of say to me like, we don't know Caprice really. I just knew like I had to process a lot of this. I stayed in contact with my previous supervisor, who was a therapist. And so I could call her anytime. I could text her anytime. It was my therapy, right? And she's not only like a close friend now, we still keep in contact to this day, but I just knew she knew my story, right? And so it was somebody I was comfortable talking to. Excuse me. And so in that, I kind of knew like I had somebody I could kind of count on. And throughout time, processing grief for me, and to this day, I've never actually physically seen a therapist for grief. Being a social worker, like I kind of, you kind of have the idea of like, okay, I know what to do, right? But having her in my corner helps a lot. Having, being the fact that I can still talk to her right now today if I need to, helps a lot. Processing grief with my family. A lot of people don't realize that everybody kind of grieves different in the same family. And so, just kind of knowing that your journey is going to look different from your mom, from your cousin, from your sibling. That was kind of how I thought about it. So like I grieved with my mama. When she needed me, I was on the phone. I grieved with my siblings, like that was how I kind of processed my grief journey. And so today, I kind of talk a little bit about grief work. This year's grief work, you all being on this call and attending this is grief work, whether you know it or not. This is your grief work. You being present to, kind of understand what grief is grief work. So this is grief work for me. This is helping me to process, my traumatic grief story. And so going forward, I plan to continue to do this. I plan to continue to, reach out as I need to whomever, whether that may be my, supervisor, whether that be a family or a friend. But that's kind of my story. That's my journey. So this is my brother. That's me and him at the top on the left at one of my daughter's competitions. And then this is him and my daughter. They were super, super close. So it was huge. And her grief journey looks different than mine because obviously that was her uncle. But yeah, so that's my story. I am now going to turn it over to Jaylin, and she's going to talk about her story.
Thank you, Caprice. That was beautiful. What's crazy about this is I've never actually spoken a lot, like publicly, about the loss of my mom, but everyone around me knows. As of June 15th, it's made 17 years since I've been without my mom. She passed away when I was 11 years old, and I'm pushing 30. So that tells you how long it's been. So my grief story is really complicated because, like my soror said, there are different things about complicated grief. Sometimes you think you know about something and you don't. So being that I was a young age, I want to first shout out my family because I was raised with love. and comfort and nurture. But I think in grief, sometimes, like everyone knows, that everyone goes through grief differently. So when you're an adult and you have a child that has lost a parent, you don't necessarily know exactly how you want to present that to that child. And so it was presented to me in a very quiet kind of way. So my mom passed away from HIV/AIDS, which I'm very educated and I'm a big advocate for now, but that took a very, very long time for me to do that. But I didn't know that when I was growing up. So my entire knowing my mom, she was actually passing. The medications that I seen her taking, she said that they were vitamins. And so my family just made it more comforting for me in the preparation that they believed, instead of more informative. And I don't fault anyone for that, but that's what makes my story a little bit complicated. So I kid you not, only a few people know this, but I'm a very spiritual person. I also believe in God, but I truly do believe that I woke up the moment that she passed over. I was sleeping at my grandma's house. Everyone was there at the hospital and I didn't know that. I've been raised by my grandma. A lot of times when my mom was sick, my dad has been in my life full time, but he worked a lot. So my grandma raised me for the most part. And so I was at her house and I woke up abruptly. And it was just a really heavy, odd, sad feeling. And then the phone rang. And I opened up the door and my grandma was on the phone, and I believe that my dad was telling her at the time that my mom had passed. And my grandma is a very, she's a Christian woman, she's Southern, she's strong, and she usually has a lot to say, a very wise woman, but she had nothing to say. And I asked her, I said, is that my mom? And there's no way that I really had known, I could have known that. So I think I shocked her. And she was just like, I can't talk to you about this because my dad wanted to be the one to tell me. So at that point, a couple hours passed by and a lot of the family members came over to my grandma's house, my dad, my stepmom at the time, and they told me that she passed. And they were like, do you want to go visit her? And excuse me, y'all, because it's the heavy part. If you do have a grief story, whatever it looks like, you don't want to live with regret. So I think that the biggest lesson that I've learned is to be able to say goodbye, but see you later. Not like goodbye forever, but goodbye physically. But I was very young at the time, so I couldn't have made that really strong, powerful decision that I would have made today. So I said no, and I didn't say goodbye physically. But that does lead me, and I will talk about this when I'm done with my story, of how I have accepted, and I'm very happy and content that I know that she's still with me spiritually. So that physical aspect is just something that I was able to be blessed enough to live through. So like I told you guys in the beginning, I was not aware that she passed away from HIV/AIDS. So my upbringing as an adolescent and a teenager, I wasn't the nicest. I gave my dad hell. Excuse my language. I did a lot. I didn't trust a lot of people because I didn't really know what was going on. I just felt like she had been gone and nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to tell me what was going on. So I just wanted to do my own thing. And I just was like, I'll just do my own thing and I'll go to school and whatever. And when my dad found out about boys, he thought that it would be a good idea to expose the truth in that way. That wasn't the healthiest way, but it's what he knew. It's what he knew to do, and it's how he was grieving the loss of his child's mother not being here to talk to her about boys. So now I have to do it, and now I have this information. So it was presented to me that way, more of like, be careful. So usually, you know, a lot of my friends tell me today, like, it was always, don't get pregnant, get on birth control, get on birth control. But my story is, be safe. Don't, you know, your mom passed away from HIV/AIDS, and this happens. And I was 16 years old when I was told this, and I was like, what? So there was so many things going through my mind, and I'm gonna be raw. I was disgusted, I was angry, I was sad, I was hurt, I had so many questions. I was mad at this person that took my mom away from me. It was a lot to process, and I did not process that until I was older. Until I realized, like, kind of like learning myself as a woman, I kind of really started processing that more, because I had to understand from a woman's perspective as well. And I wasn't a woman yet when I was told that. So that was very hard for me, and I confided in friends at the time, and I was a teenager in high school. So that resulted in bullying. I used to carry around a picture of my parents. It's actually not on this slide, but somebody scribbled AIDS on it because it had fell out of my book bag one day, and they put it like in my locker. And I went through a lot of that. At that time, people weren't educated, and neither was I. So, you know, at that time, you had people saying, you know, they don't want to use the same bathroom as you, things like that. But it doesn't end there. I actually ended up transferred to another school for a different reason, because our house caught on fire. But I said, I'm going back to Cahokia, and I'm graduating where I started. And I didn't run away from it. And when I came back, like, the entire school basically allowed me to attach a ticket for my mom on a balloon and release them, like, when they called my name. And everybody was crying, like, I kid you not, like, everybody that talked about me, parents were crying, the principal was crying, like, it was a big moment. And that is how I know God is real. That's also how I know that my guardian angel will always be with me. And you just have to keep fighting. That's 100%. I think that I've always had it in me. So it's really hard for me to give advice on exactly how to be that strong to, like, go back and face those things. And but I will say that I don't regret anything. Like I said, not being able to physically say goodbye was something that was heavy for me, but I don't regret that. There's a lot of things that I've learned to deal with that. So I do want to share with you guys some personal things that I have done by staying connected with my person that I've lost. I had a friend tell me, we were just talking about this. I had a friend who, God bless her family, she just lost her mom a couple of days ago, or about a week ago. And she texted me and she asked me, she said, how do I navigate in this world without my mom? And I'm not a parent, so it's really hard for me to speak from a mother's perspective. But the first thing that popped in my mind was, I don't think a mother, let alone anybody, a loved one, can prepare you to live without them physically. I don't think that that's ever anyone's goal or objective. It's always for a parent or a loved one is wanting to see the best version of you, the potential that they see in you. They want to encourage you and love you and share things and educate you while they are here, so that you can be this person for as long as you live. But to navigate without them, I don't think that that's ever anything you can be taught or shared. But I strongly do believe that spiritually, you have a guardian angel, you have someone that is still with you. No matter what the physical is, that is someone that gave you their love in themselves. And that's not going to ever leave you. You live that, and that is your truth. So I know a lot of people, pray, they talk to their loved ones, they journal. These are things that I've done. These are things that have helped me. I lean on my support. I share my grief with my friends, and they share theirs with me. So I get a different perspective of how they grieve and maybe how I can deal with things better. So it's really big to talk about how you feel. It's really big to ask questions. Now I have a really great relationship with my dad, and I've asked him everything under the sun. And he's giving me raw answers, and that's all that you need sometimes, is a better understanding, because there's some things you just will never understand, like why that person left you at that time. But you can learn more about who they were. And that's something that I've hemmed on a lot because I was so young. So tell me about her, like what was her favorite things like that. I do want to wrap up my story with 3 myths and facts about them when it comes down to grief, that I've learned over a decade of loss. The first one is, the myth is, the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. I've done that. I've done that 1 year, and then I accepted it, and then I did it again, and then I realized that there will always be healing when it comes down to this. There will always be a heavy spot in your heart from an irreplaceable person. That is inevitable. But trying to ignore your pain and keep it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run. So when you don't face it, it'll come back. And it's okay when you do that, but in the healing process, in order to be healed, you have to realize that you do have to face some things, some hard truths, and don't ignore it. Another myth, the second myth, is it is important to be strong in the face of loss. I am an emotional person. I started crying as soon as I started talking. I will laugh and cry. I'm an emotional person. Crying does help me. There has been times where I've cried and I've woken up and I felt better. I looked a mess. I look like I've been through some things, but I felt a little bit better. Again, processing your emotions, facing what you are feeling. It is okay to be sad. You are missing that person. It is okay to be happy about them being in the most ultimate, beautiful, painless, flawless place you can ever imagine, which is heaven. It is okay to cry about that, because you truly do feel broken when you lose a person. And healing is just a scar. You have wounds, and that's true, and it's a scar, and you can heal from that. Okay, my third myth is, moving on with your life does not mean you're forgetting the person that you lost. I saved that one for last because that's the one that makes me really sad. I think that it's important to know that, again, when someone's not physically here, it does not mean they are not with you. And when you accept it and you understand it, it does not mean that you are forgetting them. if you have to look at a picture like me, because my mom passed at a young age, it doesn't mean that you forgot her or her smile. It just means that sometimes you just need a refresher, and that's okay. But there's no such thing as moving on with your life without the person that you love, that you've lost, because again, and I will stress it, that person is with you, and you can be strong and cry at the same time. You can be happy and okay with what's going on. But the best part about grieving is processing. In order to heal, you have to process the grief. And that's it. Even if it looks like this, even if it looks like with a smile, however it looks for you. Thank you guys for allowing me to share my story.
Okay, I'm Rasheda, and my story is of anticipatory grief. So my father was everything to me. Father's Day just passed, and it's the third Father's Day without him, so I'm gonna tighten up. I'm gonna get through it. My daddy was everything to me. He was my Superman. It's 4 of us. My parents were married for 40-some years, and my dad wasn't feeling well. And I'm a nurse by trade, and if anybody's been around me, you know, if you don't look good to me, I'm like, what's wrong? You need to go doctor, you need to do this, this, and this. So my dad was kind of a trim man, but all of a sudden his stomach got really round, like pregnant round. And I was like, that's not normal. So me being a nurse, I started doing an assessment on my daddy. I was like, lay down. And I started tapping his stomach, because anybody else in here is a nurse, like you can hear fluid. And I was like, Daddy, this is all fluid. This is not right. And he would not go to the doctor, y'all. So number one, go to the doctor. Make sure you get your physicals and stay on top of your health. But he would not go to the doctor. He was running to the bathroom frequently. And my mom is also a nurse, a retired nurse. And she was like, you know, you need to go to the doctor and see if they can check out your prostate. And Daddy he was like, I'm fine. Ella, I'm fine. I'm fine. So he called me one night and said, she take me to the hospital. I'm not breathing well. Say less. I don't even think I got out. I got out of the shower and fell, because I was like in the shower, and I answered the phone. So I take him to the hospital. He gets admitted. He's there for a couple days. They do a procedure where they remove the fluid. They tested the fluid, and we're all smiling and stuff because they set him up for discharge and he was going home. So I was like, you know, they had done all these other tests and found nothing wrong. We about to leave. And one of the doctors I worked with that was trained with me when I was a new nurse, he came in and he was like, we found cancerous cells in the fluid. And I was like, what? Cancer? You know, in my head, I'm like, you just tapped fluid off of them. You pulled the fluid off. Was it a tumor? Like, what is it? They don't know. Okay, cool. My sisters weren't all there. It was me and my mom. And I literally had a panic attack and broke down in the hospital. So the years that followed after that, Daddy had taken oral chemotherapy agents, and the cancer went away. So he was in remission. If you knew anything about my dad, you would never knew he had cancer. He was out cutting grass. He was still preaching, because my dad's a minister. And I still talk about him like he's here, because that's just normal. He's a minister. He give you his last. He's just out in these Christian streets, as I call it, you know, preaching to people and laying hands on people in the jail, doing all the things, and taking his chemotherapy pill every day. And he even had a whole sermon about how God healed him. The congregation didn't know Daddy had cancer. And so he talked about how, you know, he prayed, and me and him had a back and forth about, because he didn't want to take the meds. He's like, God is going to completely heal you. And I said, he is, but God put nurses and doctors and medication down here as well. I need you to take this medication, but let's do what we can on our end. So Daddy had like a holistic doctor. started juicing and all these things. And my dad was a man who worked out anyway. He had the gym as the basement as a gym. So daddy was doing what he needed to do, as well as taking like meds. So then some years went by, he started having fluid accumulation again. And then this time he started having hernia issues that was sticking through, like he had that little rounded belly and then the hernia would stick through. So we were doing all these non-surgical things to relieve the hernia that was causing him pain. The actual cancer wasn't, but the hernia was. So he transitioned from the oral chemo to the IV chemo. And I work here in the hospital. The chemo clinic is down the hall. So I would leave work and go sit with daddy and work on my computer with daddy, because if he needed me to take him home, my parents lived down the street. So I'll take him home. He never needed me to take him home. Y'all, he would get his chemo, have his little snacks, take the ice off his hands and go home, or go preach to somebody, or go paint somebody's house. Like, he was just, I'm good. And so 2020 comes, and like I said, I'm a nurse, I'm an educator, but they took me out of my educator role and I became a COVID nurse. Also in that year, as I am working in the COVID tent with pregnant women, the doctor, my sister came from Los Angeles. My sister's very, very spiritual. I don't know if she ever joined, and I'm not gonna make her cry. She might have joined. She had feelings all along and didn't tell us. She came from LA and spent the summer pretty much with us. And she took daddy to an appointment. The same day daddy went to his appointment, I got furloughed. So for months, I had worked in the chemo tent. I would go to my parents' house because my daddy was still getting chemo. I would leave from here and I had a helmet that we wore when we saw patients. So I had a helmet and N95 and the whole garb just to see my parents, to protect them from me, because I didn't have COVID, but you never know. And my daddy his immune system wasn't as strong. So I get furloughed, and that same day, the doctor tells my dad, you got 2 months to live. How he got 2 months to live when he left the appointment and cut grass? Like, my dad did a very good job of shielding me, his medical daughter, and his medical wife from knowing anything. I think he was told early on that it had advanced, but I didn't know what advance meant, because my daddy would go to appointments and not tell us. I'd be like, what did you do today? I went to the doctor. Also at that time, I started noticing my daddy started to have what we call chemo brain. So, like I said, I would come over and be like, Daddy, what did you do today? He'd be able to tell me I did XYZ. I came over there one day, he was just as happy and smiling. I was like, hey, Daddy. He was like, hey, chocolate girl. And I was like, how you doing? He was like, I'm good. I was like, what did you do today? He was like, I don't know. I was like, Daddy, stop playing. What did you do? You just pulled up. Like, I pulled up in my car and he pulled up in the van. Where'd you go? He was like, she, I don't know. I'm for real. And I was like, is he playing? I said, Daddy, you really didn't know? He looked at me, he was like, I don't know. Y'all. I sat there for a couple minutes and didn't say nothing. But I realized he was serious. He had no idea. He couldn't remember. And he was like, Rasheda, I don't remember. I said, you just got out of the car. He was like, did I? And I was like, you did, Daddy. And he immediately got angry because he saw my face, and he was like, you are not taking my keys from me. You will not keep me from driving. So I could tell he knew something was going on. That summer, I was furloughed. It was a blessing. I got to spend that summer with my father and my family, and my sister was from Los Angeles. We all were together again like we were when we were younger. That summer, my mom's sister died suddenly in July. My daddy officiated over that funeral. A couple months later, my mama's oldest sister died, like September. My dad, from July to September, my daddy was so sick, y'all. He rode with us to the funeral, but didn't make it to the funeral. His mental status was declining. He declined so quickly. And from a nursing standpoint, it was heartbreaking to see your Superman found kryptonite. And I was so stressed. My grief journey was that I got put on an anti-anxiety pill because I he would call me in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would have to get up and take him to the ER and stay in the ER with him all night, come here, shower, put on surgical scrubs and go to work. So I have anxiety. If my phone rings in the middle of the night, I have to like talk myself down before I answer the phone, because it was probably my dad telling me he didn't feel good. And he was always like, she come get me. She take me to the hospital. So I take like Xanax every now and again. I don't have panic attacks as much. I actually had one today. And I think it was anticipation of this. But my aunt died in Michigan. We drove up there. I drove 12 hours. It's only like a 10-hour drive, but it was 12 because I had to stop, make sure my daddy was okay. He was not well. He didn't even make it to the funeral. So from July to September, he declined. We left from the funeral. Daddy still didn't want to go to the hospital because the oncologist told him he was going to die. God is going to heal him. He was praying. He took communion every day back in his room. He had oil and he would pray over himself as anoint himself. And I would go in the room and pray with him. And my grief, I just would go home sometimes and rock back and forth because I couldn't sleep, because my phone was probably going to ring at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the nights it didn't, I was grateful. But it was like so many nights that I just was like, is he going to be okay? Is he breathing okay? Is he in pain? But I would say, Daddy, do you hurt? He'd be like, do I look like I hurt, Shishi? You a nurse? Do I look like I hurt? You know, he would always make like a joke and I would laugh about it. And I'd be like, well, you don't look like it, but you know, how are you feeling? Halloween came and my mom called me and I wasn't at home. I was at my friend's house giving out candy. And she said, Rasheda, your dad is back in that room calling your name. He's in the bed. He's calling Shishi. And I sped all the way from North County because he had never done that before. Why is he calling my name? So I get there and I eventually talked him out of the house because, you know, that was a battle. And he was so, y'all, he looked so unkept. And what that means is that, like, my daddy was such a clean man. And he just looked so disheveled. And I could just tell that, like, his mental state just wasn't well. And I said, Daddy, we need to go to the ER because you can't breathe and you're short of breath. Like, it was cold outside and he had to, like, y'all, he pushed past me to the porch so he could sit on the porch, because if you know anything about it being cold outside, he was able to breathe because it was cold outside. And he sat on the porch until he could breathe, and he said, take me. I took him in October. He never came out. I worked here. The doctors used to call me on my work phone and say, your dad is deteriorating. What do you want to do? And I said, well, he has a wife. So you have to call my mama first because that's the next person. I'm his daughter. And they'd be like, your mama's not answering the phone. So that's another thing. My mama is doing the best she can, but I know it started for her then. And so mama wouldn't always answer the phone and then her ringer was off. And Daddy, one of the last things that Daddy said before he got intubated was, Shishi, do everything. And he told the nurse practitioner to do everything. So that's what we did. My daddy had a tube in his chest. He had a tube in his belly. He had a Foley catheter. He had TPN, which is IV nutrition. You know, the oncologist washed his hands of him, so he wasn't getting chemo anymore. We found out he had blood clots in his body, all over his body. So he was on heparin this other drug, until he started kind of being really sick and he would vomit blood. The doctors would call me at work and they were like, Rasheda, we're coding your dad. What do you want us to do? I said, did you call my mom? Didn't my dad say do everything? And so they intubated my father because I was like, my dad said do everything. So for the last like couple of weeks of his life, Daddy was intubated in the ICU. It was during COVID. So guess who couldn't see him? None of his children could see him. He could have one visitor a day. I work here and could not see him. The only way that I was able to see him is that my mother is not as mobile as she used to be. Someone had to push her in a wheelchair. So we finagled it. one of us would drop her off, stop in the Circle Drive, and take her up in a wheelchair. And that person got to see Daddy for a little bit, just for a little bit, like 5-10 minutes. They wouldn't let us see him until he died. He died with all of us around him. And that night was even interesting. Mama had just left the hospital. We all went and got some food. And I called the hospital to say, hey, make sure y'all have my phone number. Because if anything changes overnight, let us know. When I left, Daddy was on 2 drips. The nurses know it's vasopressin and levofed. I'm just gonna, those drugs are designed to keep your blood pressure high. That's why they keep you alive. Okay, so they keep your blood pressure at a healthy level. We left and I called the hospital to make sure they have my phone number. And the nurse answers. And I said, hey, this is Mr. Pippens' daughter. I'm just calling to make, and I couldn't even finish the sentence. She said, oh my God, I'm so glad you called. Please come back here. He's dying. I just left my daddy. Yes, his blood pressure was kind of low. You know, blood pressure when we left was like 70s over 40s, and then it would go up to like 80s or 90s. She was like, no, Rasheda, it's like 60 over 30s and it's dropping. So everybody stopped eating. We went back down the highway. I'm very matter of fact, right? I'm talking kind of matter of fact right now. I screamed from the time my sister turned the corner all the way to us pulling up in the hospital, because in my nursing head, you know, I was like, what else could we do? That was my grief. Like I had done everything. And in my head, I was like, you know, his nickname was Pip. I was like, Pip, you trying to check up out of here. There's nothing else I can do. I've done everything. You've got a tube for everything. You're on levofed and you're on vasopressin, and they're maxed. They can't turn them up anymore. So we get there. Daddy's blood pressure is low, and he had started out 50% on a vent, went from 50% to 100%, and his SATs were in the 60s. And so I was like, yeah, his body's shutting down. So my dad passed away, and we all were there. Somebody mentioned before, they don't even remember. I have no idea what happened after that. I know logistically, he died at 11:12 p.m. on a Sunday night. I didn't go to work that Monday because I didn't leave my mom's house at 6 a.m., but I was back at work on Tuesday. I worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then the next week I worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then his funeral was like Friday. So I might have worked up to that Wednesday. But I was back at work. I had new hires. I had things to do. And I didn't have that much PTO. When I walked in the door, people here were like, you are crazy. And I love my staff here. They donated PTO enough to where, along with my 3 bereavement days, I had 21 days off of work. My parents got married on Christmas, and my dad's birthday is Christmas. So I was able to go through that first Christmas without my dad. So what my grief looks like now is I'm able to talk to you all about it. I'm able to kind of make light of it and say, please go to the doctor. But I went through those feelings initially of guilt because I'm a nurse and I pride myself off of being able to save people, and I couldn't save my father. Those were real feelings I had. Like I doubted myself and almost left nursing because I was like, you couldn't do anything else for your father. So I still have feelings sometimes of guilt because I feel like if God had to take somebody, my father was such a good man and he made such an impact. And I mentioned this to somebody the other day, he could have took me. If he needed someone, I feel like my dad would have been more valuable here. I felt like he had so much work left to do. So I still struggle sometimes. I still work here. He died 2 floors above me. So it's comforting for me to come here because I feel like he's here. So I could talk all day about my dad. He was a great man. But I'll move on and I'll let Danielle tell you her grief story.
Hi, everyone. I'm doing the cumulative grief. I'm going to try to keep it together, listening to everybody, and just want to encourage everybody too that you're so brave for telling your stories. My dad, he did heating and air. He got up at like 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock every day. In 2005, he had a stroke. He had an aphasia stroke. So he had to learn how to talk, walk, everything all over again. But because he was such a man of faith, God healed him. So he didn't have many side effects from that. So like he was kind of partially blind, but my dad went right back to work. He went right back to fixing air conditioners and heaters and everything like that. But in 2014, my dad usually would go to bed early because he would be up so early. So my mom really didn't pay him any mind. And between 2005 and 2014, my dad had stents put in, and sometimes his heart would go out of sinus rhythm. And usually it would flip back on its own. But at this particular time, because he would go to bed early, my mom didn't pay any mind, and she would join him later. He had ate dinner. My sister had went over there. I had talked to him on the phone. I said, I loved him. I said, have a good night. And at that time, my sister and me lived together. We weren't but like 10 or 15 minutes away from the house. By the time my sister left my parents' house and came home, my mom called us and told us that our dad wasn't responding. So my mom was a nurse. So she got him back and they took him to the hospital. But when she got him back, they didn't know how long he had been deprived of oxygen. So he wasn't responding. He wasn't awake. So he was on a vent, kind of had like body twitches, like they were saying it was the brain waves. So my mom had talked to us because we had to discuss taking him off the vent. On March 26th, I would say, was the day that he initially passed, but they didn't officially call it until April 2nd. My mom refused to have us stay up there with her when my dad passed. So she was by herself because she didn't want us to have those final memories of him like that. And we didn't get to say goodbye. So our dad was gone when he went to the hospital. So we knew he didn't want to live like that as well, because he was such a mobile person and he liked doing things. So we knew it wasn't something that he wished to do. So after my dad passed, me and my sister, we went to work. I went to work. My mom went to work. We helped her through everything. But shortly after that, I had a hard time because my dad worked as a heat and air guy, he would be gone. So he would come home late sometimes from doing a job. So for 2 years, I thought my dad was gone on a job and hadn't come home yet. That's what it felt like. I hadn't really come to terms with, it didn't feel like he was gone. It just felt like he was just on a job. And during those 2 years, we had to be that strength for our mom because my dad was all she knew, really. They had us and everything. So I had to literally get my mom out of bed. I had to make her eat and I had to make her go, but my dad was the one to get her out the bed. He was the one. They went on trips. They went to the grocery store. That was their dates, so fast forward to, she finally got out the house like 2 years, 3 years later. But in 2017, my mom couldn't get out the bed one day. She just was sick. She got literally sick on January 1st. And we couldn't figure out what was wrong. So she had the flu, then she had something else. March of 2017, they diagnosed my mom with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And they couldn't do nothing about it. They couldn't fix it. There were no warning signs, nothing. We didn't see this coming at all. My sister had just got married in 2016. So we were dealing with that. We were dealing with the fact that, okay, yeah, we lost dad in 2014. We had to be strength for our mom, make sure she didn't, nothing happened to her during that time, because my mom was a diabetic as well. So now you add cancer onto a diabetic, and then you add in renal problems. So we kind of just dealt with her sickness, kept her, encouraged, because I don't know if anybody knows, anybody who's had cancer, it is a horrible disease. It is horrible. And you have to keep people encouraged during that time, because it was times where we had to pray our mom off a ledge. We had to pray that she didn't let that eat away at her. Because my mom was a very strong person, but this was getting to her. She didn't know what she did. She was blaming herself. So we had to keep her encouraged. So she was doing better. Things were looking up. Obviously, they couldn't fix it because it was in her bones. So they just kind of made her comfortable. So come March 2021, I got a call. Anybody knows me knows I do not answer calls when I'm asleep. But my uncle, her youngest brother, his wife called me to let me know that he wasn't responding. And I heard the paramedics pronounce him on the phone. And this is 3:00 in the morning. And I went back to sleep because she said she'd call me back. At 6:00 that morning, I called her back to say, hey, they got him back, right? I was just dreaming that I heard them say that he was gone. And she said, no, he's gone. And I had to go and tell my mom that her youngest brother, who she had just talked to, they talked every day, had died in his sleep. He woke up, couldn't catch his breath, and he was gone. That caused a problem for her, and she took it really hard. On her birthday, May 10th of 2021, my mom had to go to the hospital because her pressure dropped when she was at her oncology appointment. They told her that her kidneys were functioning at under 20%. They put her on dialysis for 3 months. They took her off in August of 2021 because they said her kidney function had improved. But after that, she got off, and we were happy, we were trying to make sure she stayed off and that she was doing good with her health and everything like that. We're like, okay, we got this. But a month later, the end of September, my mom got sick and she didn't get better. And my mom being a nurse, she had been poked, she had been, had to be in and out of the hospital. So she didn't want to go back. And that particular day that she had to go in on September, my mom cried for the first time. Out of all the times she had been to the hospital, she had cried. And she begged me not to let her go. She begged me. And I said, I won't let them keep you. I won't let them keep you, I promise. They had to keep her because the month that my mom was off of dialysis, she retained 6 liters of fluid. And they kept asking us, they were like, has she been dialyzed? And I said, they took her off. Why are you asking me that? They took her off. The doctors took her off dialysis. My mom had retained fluid. Her kidneys wasn't functioning like they needed to. And my mom, she was strong and she protected us. She shielded us alive. And I think she did that because we were born so early, but she protected us. And she didn't tell us everything. So my mom, they had told my mom that she was at a point where the cancer was getting too bad and they couldn't do anything. So she went in on September 26th. She was in there for 2 weeks. She got out for a day. And they told her she had to go back because she wasn't feeling well. They pulled 6 more liters of fluid off her. So my mom was getting 6 liters of fluid off her. She was being transfused. She was getting platelets and she was getting dialyzed all in one day. So my mom was tired, but she didn't want to pass in the hospital. So she made the decision to go on hospice. And my mom made the decision on October 13th. She wanted to go home. So she got home and they were trying their best to make sure she got home. She went home on the 15th of October. She stopped talking when my uncle got here. And I wanted him to get here because I wanted him to say goodbye to her. She stopped talking on the 18th. She stopped eating on the 18th. And my mom passed on the 23rd of October. It's very difficult. I'm glad we got to say goodbye to our mom because we didn't get to say goodbye to our dad. But it's hard watching somebody deteriorate in front of your face because I'm watching my mom who's talking, and then as soon as my uncle get there, she stops. So, I mean, for us, we were able to do a lot of things for her within the time that she was here and that she was diagnosed. We were able to give her a surprise party and document it. We were able to find videos of our dad, of him talking, voicemails and things like that. So I hold on to those things. We have a good support system. And I just encourage everyone to give people their flowers while they're here. If things aren't that bad to where they can't be fixed, to me, because it's come to a point where even with COVID, you never know what's going to happen. Tomorrow is literally not promised to anyone. So I encourage everyone, if you have a parent, you have a parent figure, to hug them, to tell them you love them, to don't argue with them. That's what I would say. And just make memories with them. Take a picture, do something for them to let them know you love them. And let them tell you the same. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you all for sharing your story. I know this is huge. Grief is a tough topic. And so I appreciate you all's vulnerability, for you guys to just kind of be authentic and share your journey. It's important to share their memory and share, good moments, bad moments, all of them, because it's really about your grief journey, and that's kind of how you process. So again, I appreciate you all sharing. I do kind of want to open it up to see if there's any attendee. If you want to, you can raise your virtual hand. If you would like to share, is it Idea?
It's Idia.
Idia.
You were so close. First, I just want to thank all of you all for sharing. My name is Idia Egon, and I'm joining from Chicago. And this is so timely because my dad is actually in the hospital right now. So I'm going to jump off after I speak to you all so I can go catch him for visiting hours. But I just want to share with you all, Jalen, when you were speaking, it resonated with me so much. My mom died when I was 11 also. And I just remember being the girl whose mom died. And just like, what that meant growing up, like none of my friends had dealt with that. So although different circumstances, I see so much of like my grief story in you. And it just feels good to know that I think that you're further along than I am, but it feels good to know that you can get to a point where, you know, you can talk about your parent and talk about your mom in that way. And also one thing that I've learned is whenever I find like a new story about my mom, like if I ask a family member, like that's something I hold on to so tight because you don't get, you know, new stories in the future. So it's all about like, what was she like before she even had me? Stories like that. And then, again, as I said, my dad had a stroke in 2020, and I think someone mentioned COVID. And for how bad COVID was, that was the first time I was able to spend almost a month with my father, taking care of him and getting that time with him. So COVID was a horrible thing, but it gave me the time that I did not know that I needed after he had a stroke. So I just want to thank all of you all for sharing. And just for giving us a space to kind of talk about this, because it's hard and you don't really get to talk about it a lot with people. Usually it's therapy, you know, but to talk about it with women who are going through it, and who have gone through it, and we're still going through their grief stories. I just appreciate it so much. I'm gonna go see my dad now, but thank you all so much for giving us this space.
Thank you, Idia, for
so
sharing.
much, and I send my love to you. And my name is the same on Facebook. So if you find me on there, we can definitely connect and you can ask questions or whatever. And I send my love and speedy recoveries to your father as well.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
I would like to share.
Yes, you are actually next. Go ahead.
I'm coming on late. I know it's a time difference or whatever, but I put it in my phone and then I didn't know if I was strong enough to talk. I've experienced the loss of a child. That was in 2009, but I also experienced the loss of my sister, who was 2 years older than me, in 2013. And she was born with diabetes and epilepsy. And she went to the hospital and they released her. I remember it was when Obama's second inauguration was happening because we were supposed to go. And she argued with the nurses, I remember, and I'll always say I feel like they gave her a prescription to die. She left the hospital with a prescription reluctantly. In less than 24 hours, she died. And although we're 2 years apart, she's older than me. And I took the role of being the big sister. I don't think I grieved her death because I was more busy trying to be strong. I post about her a lot because I don't want the world to forget who she was. Some people probably think I post a little bit too much. I never got a chance to say goodbye. I remember being in Russia at 17 as an exchange student, and I'm talking to her on the phone, and I realized she was getting sick, and I called back to America to let my parents know, go to her house, she's getting sick. So we've always had that deep connection. I feel like I'm at crossroads in my life right now, and I think her death impacts so much more because I've isolated myself a lot from her death. Those trusting relationships that I had or interactions with her, I don't really seek them. And I feel like I'm constantly borrowing other people's siblings to fill that void, and it's not working. So at times I feel broken. And then I feel like I know she got sick a lot. Is it selfish of me to still want her here? And I battle with that because life has been tearing me to pieces health-wise. And I know that she was my strength because I watch her battle so much from us being little kids and her always having a positive outlook. So I feel like in life right now, I search for her in crowded rooms. I search for her voice, her peace, her laughter, and I'm struggling. I'm struggling a lot. I'm struggling a lot. My parents in grieving, because everybody grief is different. I think me and my dad are more isolated since her death. I feel like a lot of people forgot about her. And that bothers me. And I know that everybody grieves differently, but there are pieces of me that are saying, why aren't you screaming from the top of a mountain how amazing she was, who she was? Like, I don't want her to just fade. And I know it's been so long, but I've been so busy trying to be strong for my children and my family and my friends that I just feel at a loss. I feel like if it's 20 people in the room and they haven't experienced the loss, they don't get it. You know, people tell you the cliche is God don't give you more than you could bear. God makes no mistakes. And I promised myself at her death that I would never say that to people, because the people that are left behind that truly love those people, it breaks you. It breaks you in different ways. And to hear people keep bringing that up or acting like you can't question God. I know God is a forgiving God. And I know he knows my heart, and he also knows how important she was to me. So I do question it because I feel like life has not been the same. And I told myself that at this point after her death, that I would be okay, but I'm not. And I'm sorry for rambling on.
Is it Charlize? Is that how you say it?
Charlize.
Charlize.
But you can call me Misha. It's easier.
Misha. Thank you, Misha, for sharing your story. And I'm sorry to hear about both of your loss. I don't think it's selfish at all to, still want them here. And I think it's important for you to continue to post and share about her as much as you like. That's healing for you. I also think life is not going to be the same, right? And so, kind of just knowing and sitting in that and normalizing that for you is important. And oftentimes we find ourselves like, I'm the strong person. And so like prior to giving this forum, I kind of, tried to give my story multiple times just to myself out loud. And every time I fell apart. And so being the strong person is hard. And I think knowing that you don't have to be the strong person is important to remember. You have to save space for you. And if you haven't already, I would just kind of encourage you to seek some type of counseling. You can seek grief support. I have a ton of resources that I'll provide at the end that will also be emailed to you. But sometimes we got to kind of put the weight down, right? Because it gets too heavy. And being the strong person for your family and your children is hard and it's tough. And taking care of you is important too. Okay. So I appreciate you sharing your story. And then I hope you continue to share your sister's legacy and your child's, and know that who cares? If you want to post every day, child, that's your business. And it's healing for you. So continue to do it. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brandy.
Yes, it's Brandy. On December 17th, 2021, my life like completely changed. I remember getting a phone call from my son's father telling me that my only child was shot. I was supposed to go to a Kappa party that day, but I got off work early and I overslept. And I didn't make it. And then I started thinking about what was going through my head when he told me that my son was shot. So I ended up getting in the car, going to the hospital, and they was waiting on me to sign the paperwork, for my son. So when I got there, the hospital was shut down because it was a shooting. He was a shooting victim. And when I got there, they told me that he was going to have to be transported to Memorial in Savannah. So before they took him out, the nurse asked me, she said, do you want to see your son? And I told her, yes, because they couldn't fly him out because the weather, it was so foggy. So they had to transport him by ambulance. And before all this, that week, this is on a Friday. So I just remember that week, I had a dream that my son was going to get shot. And I don't know why, but I have always had it like for years that something was going to happen to him. And he wasn't, doing anything bad. It was just, I don't know why. I just had this dream. My son had came home for Christmas for college and, just spending time with his friends, and this happened to him. But when I saw him that night, my son had his eyes closed. He wasn't really responding to them. But when I said his name and I rubbed his forehead, my son turned his head and looked at me. He opened his eyes and he looked at me. And I told him that I loved him and I kissed him on the forehead. And that was like the last time that I saw him. And I guess when I was calling everybody else, telling them what was going on, they was all in a panic, and me being a mental health counselor, I'm up here calming everybody else down saying, it's going to be okay. But something in my spirit, I just felt like that was the last time I was going to see my son. So when we got to the hospital in Savannah, they came out, and first I thought, I had to see what was going on with him. But when those 3 doctors came in, I thought they was going to tell me that, my son made it through surgery, but they told me that he didn't make it. And I looked at it and I said, what you mean he didn't make it? What am I supposed to do? That's my only child. I wasn't able to have any more kids because I had to have a hysterectomy. And it's like, he just took everything in me. I just cried for, a couple of minutes, and I got myself back together. And I said, okay, I'm gonna be okay. So I started making those phone calls. But even now, it's like I have that. I guess people look at me like, I don't see how you're not breaking down or whatever. But I think it's because I'm at peace because I was able to see him. But it's still, I still had that feelings where I'm hurt because he's not here anymore. And then just to process that, my dad, like in 2019, he was diagnosed with cancer, with bone cancer. So having to deal with that and helping him, it just took a whole lot of, it takes a whole lot in me, because it's like I'm still just trying to, have that peace. And his case is not even, we hadn't went to court yet. So it's like the guy that shot him is, locked up. But it's just the fact that I'm still having to, waiting for my son to get justice, for his death. And it just, I don't know. Sometimes I want to like, okay, Brain, are you really happy, or what's going on? But then I start thinking about how my son would be, because my son was the type of person where everybody said he had that infectious smile. So I say to myself that I have to continue living for him and doing things that he's not able to do, and not wallow and being miserable because he's not here. But this is the first time I really told my grief story like amongst people. But I thank you all for having this.
Thank you for sharing, Brandy.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your story and you being vulnerable and this being your first time sharing. It's a lot of our first times as well. So thank you for your willingness to share. And I'm hoping, sending you prayers and peace as you continue your grief journey. But thank you.
Thank you.
Emefa, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong.
Hi, good evening. That's okay. Emefa.
Emefa, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. First off, I want to say thank you to the chapter for having this event. I think it's powerful, and unfortunately, grief is not something that gets talked about a lot. So thank you for having this event. My name is Emefa Abatsi, and I lost my dad at the age of 9 years old. Growing up, I was told that he had health issues, but as an adult, I actually found out that he actually died by suicide. In my case, I'm happy that my family wasn't truthful with me about how he died, because I don't think I would have been able to handle that information as a child. So I'm thankful that they spared me from the truth. But when I found out the truth, I actually fainted and collapsed because it was just like, wow, why would my dad do that? Like, why would he leave me? Why would he leave my family? Um, I've had conversations with my mom. She's been open and honest and truthful about answering any questions that I have. Learned that he struggled heavily with depression. Um, did try to get treatment, but unfortunately, it just didn't work. Um, Father's Day is always a difficult time. Um, I have been to therapy, so thankfully, I'm now at the point where I no longer cry on Father's Day, but I can't go to church. I stay off of social media. I pretty much just, will read a book or um, watch Netflix. Um, I also feel like it kind of affected me emotionally. I feel like sometimes that might present itself in relationships when I date men, just because I guess I lost that covering. So sometimes it's hard for me to, know how to properly relate to men. And that's something that I'm currently seeking therapy about because I know that that can be a factor that can cause people to be preyed on, unfortunately. But yeah, I guess I'm at the point now where I can talk about it. I can share my story with people to help them with their grief. Um, for the first time in like 20 something years, I visited his grave to put flowers on. Um, so I'm very proud of myself for doing that because for the longest time I just couldn't. But there was a part of me that kind of felt guilty, like, I'm abandoning him. So now I'm happy that I can at least visit his gravesite and talk to him and just let him know his daughter's doing well. Um, went to a fantastic school, working at a great job. And I guess the biggest thing now that I really that bothers me is, I do want to be married someday and, just not having him here to walk me down the aisle. I know that's something that I'm gonna have to try to get over before that date comes. But again, thank you all for letting me share my story, and thank you so much to the chapter for hosting this event. Great topic and wonderful to meet you all, and to those who have been brave enough to share your stories. Thank you. I had your inspiration from each of you sharing your stories, which enabled me to be able to share my story today. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry to hear about your father. I am happy to hear that you are doing grief work. You're in therapy, and you plan to continue. And so that's important just to kind of help you process. And one thing to think about later on, any type of father figures that you have in your life, you can possibly look to them to walk you down the aisle, just another idea, so that you at least still have someone standing in the gap for you, if that makes sense. But I appreciate you sharing your story and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Juanita?
Good evening. First of all, Gamma Kappa Omega, thank you all. My apologies. Thank you all for having this event. And it wasn't by mistake that your event happened to pop in my news feed. I'm in California, and I'm going through grief right now. On February 26th, the last day of my son's life, the most devastating day of my life, I lost my son tragically. He was involved in a car accident, a single car accident, and he did not survive. My first time sharing this with people outside of my circle and people who I don't know. I wasn't even in the state when he passed. It was on a Sunday. I was actually in Las Vegas running a race, and I was almost finished with the race when I got the call on my phone But thank goodness when I'm running, I typically don't answer my phone. My husband happened to be with me in Vegas. And so I didn't recognize the number, so I never picked up that call. And then finished the race, and my husband got the call. He got the call second. When I didn't pick up, they called him. And he was totally different. He was cold, he was shaking, and I thought I had gotten him sick because I had ran the race on Friday and it rained that whole time. And so I thought I had gotten him sick, but he had gotten a call, and it wasn't until we got back to our hotel room, and he wasn't going to share with me at that moment. He wanted to wait till we got home to tell me. And I happened to get a text message that said, "I'm so sorry." I don't even remember what it said. "Praying for you." And so I asked my husband, "What does this mean?" And that's what he told me. And of course I lost it because number one, it was hard to believe. And number two, I was nowhere near him at that time. So called the airlines, was able to get out. We got out on one of the last flights. It was the longest 45-minute flight ever. Like I said, it's my first time sharing this. I'm actually making it through this okay, considering. Those nights, those days, those like first 2-3 weeks, unimaginable. I go to sleep crying, I wake up crying, thinking that this is not true. But I'm thankful for the many support systems that I had, still have, going through that. One being my sorority sisters, my church members, my run crew, and just family and friends who helped get me through that. Every day is pretty much a struggle. I have good days and I have bad days. One thing I'm truly thankful for is the pictures I captured, because you never know how that comes into play later on down the line. And truthfully, Facebook can be really good. They do bring up a lot of the memories, which are good. So I was able over the years, my son was 20 when all of this happened. Ironically, when we were in Vegas, my husband and I we were actually looking at places to celebrate his 21st birthday. But it's the memories from Facebook that pops up that makes me happy and sad at the same time. That's because I have memories with him smiling, the many things that we did individually, my son and I, or with the family, which is good. Like I said, my first time actually speaking to someone outside of my circle regarding this. It's still a struggle, of course. And ironically, today is actually 4 months of his passing. I didn't even realize that until a little while ago. I guess that's all I need to say. I mean, there's questions, I'll answer questions, but I just felt the need, since I had the opportunity that you allowed all of us as participants to actually speak on it.
Well, first off, thank you, Juanita, for sharing your story. I'm sorry to hear about your son. And I appreciate you, being vulnerable tonight and being a first-time sharer like the rest of us. Grief is tough. And, I hope you're taking care of yourself and you are seeking support, whether that be therapy or grief counseling or grief support groups. It's a journey, and I'm sorry that you're at the beginning of it, but I do appreciate your willingness to share tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that is everyone who had their hand raised. So again, thank you everyone for deciding to share your story. I have a couple takeaways for you all. These are just different coping mechanisms. And so these you actually will receive as well in the email, just to go through a couple briefly. Taking care of yourself, getting a checkup with your primary care is important. Getting some exercise or just a quiet walk helps. Trying to decrease your caffeine will decrease your nervousness or restlessness or anxiety. A lot of us, try to get the caffeine in early so that we can kind of keep the day going, but sometimes it doesn't help. So try to decrease if necessary. Reach out to others as needed. It's important to find a family or a family member or a friend whom you can talk to. Just going to be aware of some of the depressants like substance use. Alcoholism is huge. Substances are huge. We tend to suppress, and that is a depressant. So just try to be mindful of that. Ask for what you need. Sometimes we don't know what we need, and maybe we just need to tell our friend, hey, I just need you to come over and help me do my laundry, help me get these dishes done, or just sit with me while I do it, or just sit on the couch with me. So even if you don't know what you need, still, have the willingness to reach out. You may cry often, but realize it's helpful. Just know, as a social worker, I always encourage my patients to cry because it's an emotional release. It's necessary, it's needed. Confront guilt and realizing you did the best you could. That kind of goes back to kind of bargaining and wishing you could have did more. Knowing that you did the best you could with what you had at that time, and that's okay. Becoming familiar with normal experiences of grieving kind of will help you engage in your own grief work. So I've kind of talked on and off tonight about grief work. This is grief work, going to counseling, finding grief support, or services that can kind of help you, coping mechanisms, be intentional about your grief work. It's necessary, it's needed. Find support from both inside and outside your family. Kind of know, that because maybe your family has experienced the grief, they might not be the first person to always reach out or first person to always help. So it's okay to find a family or, it's okay to find a friend or someone else that you may know that you can kind of help confide in. Join a support group and seek therapy. We've kind of talked about that tonight as well. And then just kind of don't expect your friends to meet all of your expectations. Sometimes we think that, my cousin should have called me or my auntie should have reached out. Know that they are grieving too, right? And it's going to look different for them. And that's all right. And then the next slide.
Caprice, before you move to the next slide, there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Do you have any tips to deal with the emotional side of grieving for someone who just lost a parent?
I would like to follow up. I'm sorry, my camera is all messed up, but when it comes down to the emotional side, I think it'll always be an emotional journey, because when I am sorry for my crazy dog, but because as you grow, you are like literally becoming a new person, a new woman. You step into new careers, meeting new people, you have new lives, and that's all an emotional journey. So your support system is one of the biggest things that you will have. But for people that do not have a support system, or like Sora Caprice said, they're grieving as well. So sometimes your support system doesn't always have that support that you are seeking. So that is absolutely why seeking a professional is something that is it's imperative. I'm a social worker. I got my master's in social work. So just like Caprice, I'm surrounded around therapists and psychiatrists. And so I've had that type of support in my field. But my other parent, I lean on. Like I said, I ask questions. Who is she? Like, why did you fall in love with her? Why did you make me, keep me? You know, things like that, to really understand the love that I came from. I know that a lot of decisions are made. Parents make these decisions and they don't tell their child everything, and to protect them for those reasons. And that leaves you a very heavy emotional piece. But channeling into why that's love. It looks different and it feels different, but accepting that, oh, she loved me so much that she wants to give me he or she wants to give me everything from them. And I've used that to cope with as well. Journaling, writing down how you feel, even if it's good, it's bad, going back and reading that on a good day, like, oh, I'm better today than I was what I journaled 2 days ago. Listening to podcasts, things like that. And really, honestly, for me, is God. I'm reaching out to God, praying, understanding the word, looking up scriptures that channel and that are talking about grief and talking about heaven and what it could possibly, how flawless it is, just that, trying to uplift myself. Those are some of the things.
Danny, did you want to comment?
Yes, just to add to what she was saying, I still have issues with the emotional side of things, just because I was really close to both my parents. And I think a lot about what I'm not gonna get to have with them. But one thing that I kind of did, like, to help me through it is, a lot of my mom's close friends are very motherly to me. So I lean on them a little bit, and they allow me to, because they know that that's something that I need right now, and they would do it either way. And like she was saying, you know, just journaling. I write to my mom, I write to my dad, I tell them about my day, I tell them everything, just as if they were here. But just trying to find what will kind of help you through those moments, like the memories and things like that. So.
Thank you, Danielle. And then Candace.
Yes, Madam President, I just wanted to give you a kudos to you and as well as your committee for putting this program together. This is a well needed program, especially talking to Black and Brown families. My takeaway is this: for those of us who are friends of individuals who are grieving, please reach out to us, because sometimes we don't know how to help you. We love you, but we don't know where we fit in this process. So keep us in the loop. And a lot of times we're not being nosy. We do love you. We want to help you through this process, because I feel as though burying children, burying parents, that is the part of being an adult no one tells you about, especially burying parents. That is ghetto. That is the ghetto part of being an adult. I highly don't recommend it. I know one day that's going to happen to me. And I know that is something I am dreading. And for those who have experienced it, my kudos go out to you. And just always remember that there is no time stamp on this thing called grief. Do not let anyone tell you still grieving over your daddy. He been dead 3 years, and you can keep grieving. You can keep grieving because that was your dad. Do not let anyone fool you into thinking, well, you should be over it by now. I remember when my grandmother died when I was 15, and she buried my uncle when he was 21. She never got over the death of my uncle to the day she died. So if there are resources in your communities, please reach out. There is no shame. And for those of you who have employee assistance, EAP, use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace, for sharing, and thank you so much for providing additional insight and resources to the attendees. There was another question from Jillian Turner in the chat as far as anticipatory grief. So thank you for sharing a little bit of your story and kind of what you're going through. So yes, anticipatory grief is an actual form of grief. There's education online in reference to what that may look like. It sounds like one of your parents has, been terminally ill for a long time. And so anticipatory grief is just that, knowing that there is a terminal illness and knowing that there may be a loss at some point. So there are supports. So here are some of the resources that I have. Psychology Today is on here. So if you just kind of Google Psychology Today and type in anticipatory grief, it's going to provide you with some education on what that may look like. And then kind of like some of the defense mechanisms that kind of come through with anticipatory grief. And so that may offer you some type of support. These are resources for tons and tons of mental health concerns, as well as grief. There's a grief share, www.griefshare.org. You can go there and learn more about the different forms of grief as well. And on the American Counseling Association. The ones on the right-hand side are actual clinicians, basically. So you can click on any of those. You'll type in your zip code and then your local therapist will come up. It'll pull a list for you. So who's offering services locally to you. These are both in clinic as well as telemed visits. So teletherapy, if that's something you're more interested in. Therapy for Black girls and therapy for Black boys is something I use a lot with my patients at work. And so on here, you will find both psychiatrists and psychologists, someone who can provide therapy service for you and someone who can provide medication if you're interested in it. I don't see any other hands raised or any other questions in the chat. Madam, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you once again to everyone who has shared, who has participated on this evening. This is not an easy topic for any of us to discuss or even face our emotions. That's one of the hardest things I think to do, because we're always told we have to be strong. So I commend each and every one of you for getting on this evening and sharing your grief story, sharing about your loved ones. And we want to keep the conversation going. But before we move on, we had a quick survey poll just to kind of see how this event worked for you, if it's something that you will want to participate in the future. So I'm going to launch that. It's roughly 5 questions. We have some upcoming events coming up, and then we would like to get a group photo. So if you're able to come off the camera, please do. If not, we completely understand. It is later in some parts where you might be tuning in. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And once you're done, we'll go ahead and finish with the program. I think everyone, oh, we just got a couple more people, sorry. Okie doke. Okay. So thank you all so much for filling out the poll. We truly appreciate it. And we'll have future events coming up that will be virtual as well as in person. So we look forward to having each and every one of you participate in those upcoming events. Our next event that is virtual is called Power Up Your Brand. So if you are an entrepreneur or an inspiring entrepreneur, please join us on Thursday at 7:08. We will be speaking about the importance of brand management, your personal brand, as well as your business brand. So if you would like to register, it's completely free, and you can just scan the QR code that is on the screen, and it'll take you directly to Eventbrite to secure your spot for the event on June 29th. Also, during the month of June, it is Black Business Month. And so we want to encourage you to support Black businesses. If you know some great businesses that need our support, please feel free to drop us a line and let us know. We want to make sure that in June, particularly, that we are supporting the Black dollar. And so if you shop at Black businesses, please share that with us, and we'll be putting out a resource with additional Black businesses that you can support all year around. So as we conclude this program, I once again want to thank each and every one of you for joining. I would like to close out this program with a prayer, just because I know that we touched on some topics and unsurfaced some things that we have to do the work for. So I'm a firm believer that we have to take God with us wherever we go, whatever we might be going through. And this is one thing that I feel we need to do tonight before we all go to lay down or go to our nets. So Father God, we just thank you, Lord. We thank you that we can come to you with our heavy things, that we can come boldly and even question you. We can question the why we lost our loved one, the why we're going through certain situations, the why we experience certain pains. We know that we can question you because we know that we can trust you. We know that you love us no matter what we might be going through, no matter how difficult it might be. So we pray, God, that you will continue to comfort us, that you will continue to help us, that you will continue to be in the midst of our storms that we might be facing. Lord, we thank you for the time we have with our loved ones. We thank you for the memories. We thank you for the reminders. We thank you for the sense that we can, when we lose someone, we can smell them still, we can feel them still, we can hear their voice still. There's reminders that pop up. We love with our senses, and you gave us that for a reason. So we thank you that even though they may no longer be here with us, there's still a part of them here with us. We pray that you will remain near during this time, whenever we feel weak and that we experience pain. We pray and we thank you for your sustaining grace. We pray that you will continue to strengthen us. But when we can't carry the weight, when it's too heavy for us to carry, Lord, we give it to you. We give it back to you to carry it for us, God. We pray that you will continue to give us courage to embrace each day. And we pray, Lord, that you fill us with your peace, your joy, and you continue with us on this journey, as we know that we are not alone. And it's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. So we just thank you once again for joining. I thank our panel, Caprice, Rasheda, Jalen, Danielle. Thank you so much for sharing for putting this program together. The work that we do is done by our chapter, by each and every member that's a part of Gamma Kappa Omega. We could not put on the programming if it was not for the ladies that represent our chapter. So I thank you for just your boldness and your willingness to continue this forum. So we thank you also to our participants, those of you who shared your grief story with us, the first time sharers. Thank you for entrusting us with that. We don't take it lightly that you chose to entrust your memory of your loved one with us. And so we pray continuous strength for each and every one of you. You will be receiving an email with the coping mechanisms and the resources. And I just pray God's peace among each and every one of you and your families. And know that you hold a special place in our hearts for taking the time out this evening to participate in this forum with us. So I pray that you all have a wonderful evening, and thank you once again for joining Gamma Kappa Omega chapter in our Twist of Grief Forum, Part 2, Pink Table Talk. Have a wonderful night.